Hello there, and thank you for joining us on the special Inauguration Day edition of Journalist Hangout. I am Kemi Fola Adeyemo. Today on the program, President Tinubu promises effective governance, economic remodeling during inaugural speech. And I'll be hanging out with Babajide Kolade Otitoju and Adewale Adeoye, who are here with me in the studio. Of course, we also have joining us from our Abuja studio, Mojid Dairu. Gentlemen, you're all welcome to Journalist Hangouts, this special edition of the program. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
If you're ready, Journalist Hangouts starts now. Let's start by paying tributes to the founder and chairman emeritus of Dar Communications, High Chief Raymond Dokpesi, who died this Monday at the age of 71. High Chief Dokpesi was a respected and accomplished businessman, a pioneer in the media industry, and a philanthropist. His death, I just discovered it a few minutes ago, BKO, it really is shocking.
Yes, really shocking. I didn't even know he was ill. And frankly, Dokpesi has touched many lives. Many people would not have achieved their dreams of becoming broadcasters if not for the revolutionary steps that he took in the early 90s when government decided to deregulate the broadcast industry. We would have been saddled with NTA and NTA and NTA. But he got onto the scene and Nigerians began to see 24-hour television. You know, some people saw it for the first time in their lives. And that communication has really revolutionized the sector in many ways. And such achievement could not have been recorded if not for the giant steps that Dokpesi took. He was a pioneer. He took a risk, because when you are coming to a new line of business, for somebody who was working at the MPA, he took a risk getting involved in broadcast journalism, and today he has given himself immortality in our country. He can never be forgotten. So I wish him eternal rest in the bosom of our Lord, and I decree peace to members of his family, his immediate family, you know, who now have to bear the pains of this irreparable loss.
Right. Wale Adeoye, what do you make of the passing of High Chief Raymond Dokpesi?
Well, that is the penalty we all need to pay for the privilege of living. At one point or the other, I mean, one will have to leave this world. The important thing is that I think he has left a legacy that will remain forever. As far back as 1994, he set up the Ray Power, and then in 1996, AIT, the first private radio station in the history of radio communication in Nigeria, and the first satellite television station that is, even as of today, is broadcast in America, the Caribbean, and also in Europe. And also, it was not just in the field of media; it was also the first to set up the first shipping line, indigenous shipping line in Nigeria. He's a man of accomplishment, even though he died at 71. But I think remains an evergreen. It remains an evergreen reference in terms of achievement. So his death is shocking, but we have to accept it as something we cannot do anything about. And I wish his family, and the media, the strength to be able to shoulder this tragic loss.
Absolutely, and of course not forgetting the staff of his media entities, that's Ray Power and AIT. Of course, this is a significant time in Nigeria's history, talking about the inauguration day, and of course they are part of the several media crew who are all over bringing information, and now they have to do their duty with this big loss. We pray for the repose of the soul of Raymond Dokpesi. All right, it's the beginning of a new dawn in Nigeria as President Bola Ahmed Tinubu takes over power from former President Muhammadu Buhari. In his inaugural speech, President Tinubu promises effective governance that will bring more prosperity to Nigeria through the remodeling of the country's economy. Let's hear from the president.
We shall consult and dialogue, but never dictate. We shall reach out to all, but never put down a single person for holding views contrary to our own. We are here to further mend and heal this nation, not tear and injure it. In this way, there are over a few comments regarding the election that brought us here today to this junction. Yes, it was a hard-fought contest and was also fairly won. Since the advent of the Fourth Republic, Nigeria has not had an election of a better quality. I said so. The outcome reflected the will of the people. However, my victory does not render me any more Nigerian than my opponent. Nor does this render them any less patriotic. Our mission is to improve our ways of life in a manner that nurtures our humanity, encourages compassion towards one another, and duly reward our collective effort to social ills that seek to divide us. Nigeria will be impartially governed according to the rule of law. In our administration, women and youth will feature prominently. Our government will continue to take proactive steps such as championing a credit culture to discourage corruption while strengthening the effectiveness and efficiency of the various anti-corruption agencies. That's to be a continued work in progress. Security shall be top priority of our administration because neither prosperity nor justice can prevail amid insecurity and violence. To effectively tackle this, we shall reform both our security doctrine and its architecture. On the economy, we target a GDP not less than 6% growth. We aim to accomplish all of this by taking the following steps. budgetary reform, stimulating the economy without engendering inflation, industrial policy to utilize the full range of domestic manufacturing and lessen import dependency. The electricity will become more accessible and affordable to businesses and homes alike. Power generation should nearly double, and transmission and distribution network must improve significantly. We will encourage various state governments to continue to participate in this effort, power generation and distribution of their own.
President Tinubu there in his inaugural speech earlier today, where, of course, at the Eagle Square in Abuja at his inauguration. And there were several takeaways from that speech, even though it trickled down from his Renewed Hope campaign, which also was made him emerge victorious. So let's talk some more about what Asiwaju Tinubu has said so far. And the first in that soundbite that we showed you was the issue of the elections, this particular cycle of elections that brought him or made him victorious, even though he acknowledged the intense battle from his rivals.
Yes, and he recognized the rights of those who contested against him to go to court. And he said the fact that he has won the election does not make him more patriotic than them. He was saying the right things, that look, I will defend your right to seek legal action, to try and prove that you won the election. And apart from that, he praised the man that he has succeeded. He described him as a very honest lover of our country. And he promised that women and youth will feature prominently in his administration. Physically challenged people also want to feature, because inclusion is the name of the game now. And you can see that even the former president of Kenya advised him to reach out to the opposition so that peace can be guaranteed in our country. President Tinubu also expressed his joy about the smooth transition from President Buhari's administration to his. And he said that has become the character of Nigeria. By saying that, he's saying, look, the world now knows us for peaceful transitions. We didn't see soldiers going to the Eagle Square to arrest him, as some Shakabula preachers had told us would happen. We didn't see interim government suddenly happen. We didn't see military handover. We saw a civilian to civilian transition, and it was done in a very smooth manner, in a manner that makes us proud as Nigerians. I mean, if you ever thought that joining the army was such a bad thing, the show that the military puts on display today will make anyone who wants to be a soldier. The way they were marching, everything just went smoothly, So it is something that Nigerians should be proud of, that we put on this kind of show before presidents of the
Absolutely.
world. They were watching, and I'm sure the feedback that they got was positive because before this May 29, we were told all kinds of things will happen and all that. But to the glory of God, no one has lost his life. The transition went on smoothly. Mr. President also promised that electricity will become more accessible and formidable. It's a good thing now that the Buhari administration has amended the laws to allow for states to generate their own electricity. So hopefully we'll get to that point when electricity will be more accessible and we'll have different sources of electricity explored, because we've not really explored other sources like hydro, like wind, and the rest of them. Hopefully, under his administration, steps will be taken to do that. And he also talked about multiple taxation, that they are going to look at the issue of multiple taxation. He said that his government will take steps to make food available. I think this is very important. Food inflation is literally running riot in our country. So whatever steps he can take, I know he has talked about commodity boards. Commodity boards were used during the First Republic. So I think Ashwaju is trying to achieve some measure of price control, especially for essential commodities, so that people can have food in abundance. And then he promised to continue the achievements of President Buhari on infrastructure. That also resonates with me, because when you look at President Buhari, the greatest achievements, in my view, that he has recorded are in the area of infrastructure. People may not give him credit for so many things, but in the area of infrastructure, I think President Buhari has done well. And this new president has promised to sustain his achievements in that area. He also said our administration shall govern, not rule over Nigerians. This suggests that he will respect the rule of law, and he will continue to take feedbacks from the public. It's important to communicate with the people. It's important to know what the people want and what they do not want. You've got to be a listening government. And he has made it clear that he will govern the people, not rule over them. So I think that conveys a very strong meaning in terms of the kind of administration that intends to run.
All right, let me quickly come to Abuja studio now, where we have Mojid Dairu, a newspaper columnist, also joining in. Let's bring you in now to, this leg of our discussion, looking at that document or the speech by President Tinubu titled The Nigerian Ideal. Of course, he started off by saying nations other than Nigeria would have crumbled with the hardships the country has survived, and now this is like the proudest moment of his life, not just his life, but Nigerians. How do you reflect on that speech?
It is conciliatory in tone, it is patriotic, and it is very statesmanly. It is also very reassuring that we have a president that intends to govern and not to rule over the Nigerian people. But most importantly, the inauguration speech of the president speaks to the integrity of his manifesto, his renewed hope manifesto, upon which he ran for the office of the president and got elected, because a major part of the speech was simply a reaffirmation of some of his campaign promises, and which conveys the impression that we might just have a president now who says what he means and means what he says. And he said some very far-reaching things in that speech. He basically laid the philosophical foundation for his administration and, by extension, the ideal Nigerian nation. He talked about social cohesion and national unity. He talked about fairness, equity, and justice for all Nigerians, irrespective of ethnicity, creed, or region of origin. And he laid out, in broad terms, a Marshall Plan for the resuscitation of the Nigerian economy that is quite ailing. And that was why he admitted that what Nigerians have been through in a couple of years before now would have imploded some other countries. So that is like a tacit admission that things may not have been as well as it should be. And thankfully, the speech is also devoid of any form of divisive rhetoric, as well as all forms of blame games of the past administrations. He conveyed the impression that he was a man who was hired to do a job, and he's aware of the enormous responsibility ahead of him, and he's taking full responsibility for those responsibilities. And that is one thing that a lot of Nigerians are looking forward to in the apex leadership of this country. And so, to that extent, it was quite reassuring. And if he's able to match these words that he spoke today with actions, deliberate and purposeful actions, I think he might just be able to achieve his objectives of leaving Nigeria in a much better place than he met it whenever he bows out of office. So I think it's a very good speech. It was quite reassuring. And I'm sure it would have signaled in many Nigerians a renewed hope of some sort that will be further renewed if he matches his words with action.
Right, Mr. Dairo, let me put you on hold and come back to the studio to get the take of Wale Adeoye here. Of course, he spoke to the key problems or challenges before the country, one of which is security, of course, and he promised to beef up the entire architecture and doctrine of, security across the country.
I think one of the major problems Nigeria faces today, security and economy. And I'm impressed by his position on security. He used the word reform the security architecture. And I think that is promising enough. And I also think on the economy, he spoke about unified exchange rate, which I think is a major plank that is needed to make Nigeria grow. You can't be selling dollar, 700 naira somewhere, some other place 750, then official rate is about 450. That will, create a lot of crisis, and that's the challenge we have been having for the past 3 decades. He also said he will reduce interest rate to increase investment, and also we address the issue of GDP, which I think these are very important issues. Well, it is important in the sense that the person talking to us is an accountant. We have listened to leaders in the past who are soldiers, who are this and all that. But an accountant is somebody who understands the figures. That speech is not flamboyant. It's not, when you read it, this is not somebody just giving promises, but simple, precise, and direct. And he also said that this is just a guide, that the main policies will come, in days ahead. So I think we have a kind of renewed hope. And like Babajide said, the smooth transition is a plus to the democratic content. You could see that Buhari and also President Buhari and the new president, they came with their wives and children, which tells you the family content of the transition itself, which I think is very important for us as Africans. And I hope that in the next few months, we'll be able to hold him to his words. I personally believe that having an accountant to lead this country is a new thing, And he also spoke about people in the Niger Delta, in the north, in the east, talking about uniting all of us together, to ensure that our shared aspirations, our common fears are addressed. We cannot judge people just by the speech they've made, but at least it's something that we can hold a leader, we can hold him on, that speech. I think it's a promising speech. And I have confidence that based on his precedents, we should be hopeful that the next 6 months, 1 year, we should be able to begin to see some changes in this country. Yeah.
BK, among the takeaways, and of course, newspapers, media outlets are already leading with the headlines, the issue of fuel subsidy. He never shied away from that subject, and he also gave mention to it in his speech, of course, saying that, okay, thanks to President Buhari for announcing the phasing out of the fuel subsidy regime, but, then he will take it further.
Yes, I think it's important to let Nigerians know that the decision to remove subsidy was taken by the middle past administration. The appropriation law that we are still using is the 2022 appropriation law. And it is that 2022 appropriation law that has been extended. For the 2023 budget, no provision was made for subsidy. So technically speaking, subsidy was being removed by the previous administration. That decision was taken to remove subsidy effective from the 2023 budget. So President Tinubu has no new decision to take. The National Assembly has agreed to the idea of subsidy removal. It just happens to be somebody who come into office, and it is in his time that that decision will be implemented. Government is a continuum. President Buhari can take a decision that he may not even be in office to implement. You've seen that happen. Talking about GSM, for example, GSM, it wasn't the government that implemented it, that actually initiated it. Projects are initiated, some taking 4 years, 5 years, long after the government that initiated it had left office. It will now be implemented. So that's the way I see subsidy. The decision, so when he says subsidy is gone, is referring to the decision that had been taken to remove subsidy even before he took power. So based on the 2023 appropriation law, subsidy is gone. And the finance minister has talked about that, a number of times. Look, there's no going back. We've taken a decision to remove subsidy. So if anyone wants subsidy restored, they will have to go through the National Assembly. But the point I'm making is that by the time the 2023 budget gets implemented, subsidy is not provided for, not appropriated for in that budget, because that collective decision had been taken to remove it. And I'm happy all the contestants were in agreement that subsidy had to go, because it's not even it's not benefiting the poor. There are some people who sit down somewhere and are becoming billionaires out of these subsidy bills. So that has to be addressed, whether we like it or not at some point, because a country that spends 6 trillion or plans to spend 6 trillion on subsidy cannot be taken seriously. Why did we have to let things degenerate to this point? The World Bank has already projected that we are going to spend 100% of our revenue to service debt. How did the debt come about? Every little expenditure on infrastructure, we think that the best thing is to go and take a loan. And that's why the IMF suggested to Asiwaju that he must address the problem of revenue generation, because it's that insufficient revenue generation that is pushing us, as well as the subsidy that ensures that money that can be used on projects, on healthcare, on education, gets diverted to servicing consumption. So I'm happy that they suggested to assure you that, look, address revenue generation, because it will then enable us to find the funds to fix critical infrastructure without having to go cap in hand begging for money. We have even reached a point whereby creditors are running away from giving us loan. The Chinese the other day turned down a loan request. Everyone can see that the capacity to pay is not really there. Because if your budget is on deficit by more than 11 trillion, it's something to be worried about. Where are you going to find money to pay if you just keep taking loans? Because it's not even the principal that we are talking about, it's still the interest that is gulping about, I think the last time I checked, 96% of our revenue went to debt servicing. So the World Bank has predicted that 100% of our revenue will go to debt servicing. So what do we then do? And we are spending 6 trillion on subsidy. So it's a tough decision to take. Otherwise, Nigeria will go bankrupt. That was what Sanusi said the other day, that we have a tough decision to take. This president will have to take big decisions. It will be tough in the beginning. Nigerians must be ready. It will be tough in the beginning. When the final analysis, Nigerians will see the benefit of those big decisions. Good leaders are never afraid to take the big decisions because they know that they are taking those big decisions in the interest of everyone.
All right. Mr. Dahiru, let's bring you in at this point now. This issue of fuel subsidy, there was mention of it in the president's inaugural speech. But what do you really think?
I'm one of those who, the concept of subsidy for energy, good products and services, and for food, for housing, healthcare, education, is not in itself something that is bad. It's part of the component of welfare responsibility of government anywhere in the world. However, we have a peculiar problem in Nigeria where the subsidy on petrol, for example, is one that is an aberration because Nigeria is an oil-producing country that ordinarily should be refining petroleum at home, enough for local consumption and export, not to pay subsidy on imported petrol. So I think beyond removing subsidy, we need to address the issue of self-sufficiency in refined petroleum products at home, because the president talked about electricity being available and affordable. The same thing has to also go for energy products and services from fossil fuel, because together with electricity, they form energy. And energy is a matter of national security, which must be available and affordable at the same time. So sometimes you may need some level of intervention from government by way of subsidies. But given these current circumstances, the subsidy management in Nigeria is one that has been shrouded in a lot of opacity, corruption, and non-accountability. And so the president campaigned firmly, unequivocally, on the fact that he was going to remove subsidy. And all I said, his inaugural speech speaks to the integrity of his campaign promises. And this is one of his campaign promises. He was very bold and frontal about it. I may not agree with it. I do not agree with it. I have a different idea about this. But this was what he said he was going to do. And interestingly, his two closest rivals for the presidency, the candidate of the PDP, Atiku Abubakar, and the candidate of your party, Mr. Peter Obi, similarly campaigned on the same promise, on the same pledge, to remove subsidy in absolute terms, meaning that Nigerians overwhelmingly voted for the removal of subsidy. So what the president has just done today is just to simply grant Nigerians their wishes. But I'm not one of those Nigerians who voted for the removal of subsidy because I think subsidy is a bad idea. No, I just think that it is not being properly done in Nigeria. And I also think that we need to see an energy master plan that clearly spells out a roadmap for energy security in Nigeria, which must necessarily come with some level of government intervention by way of subsidies. All over the world, subsidies are paid for energy, for food, and for some other components of welfare for citizens. But in the case of Nigeria, the man that has become president today campaigned on this and won election based on this promise. And so he's bound by his words. He needs to remove subsidy as he has promised. Whether the removal of subsidy might create problems, which I foresee, additional problems, then we will now begin to suggest ways to mitigate those problems in the future. But he has done what he has promised to do, and that speaks to the integrity of his campaign promises, and probably to his own personal integrity. And so, for that, he has simply fulfilled one of his campaign promises. And he has a lot more campaign promises that he has outlined he intends to fulfill. And I must point this out. He talked about the reduction of interest rates by the CBN. I think that is one of the most far-reaching and most progressive propositions I've heard so far in modern times. Because we cannot continue to maintain a double-digit interest rate on borrowing. So meaning that while he's removing subsidy on petrol, for example, which is like the live wire of Nigeria's SME, he's also proposing a reduction in interest rate, which might mitigate the cost of production that might be associated with the removal of subsidy. He has also talked about an availability of electricity at an affordable rate. So I think taking all of this together...
We'll continue our conversation on Journalist Hangout. We'll continue dissecting the president's inaugural speech, but we have to take this break. Please stay with us.